Hello, I'm Lauren James. I'm the author of many science fiction books, including The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, which is about a girl alone on a spaceship, The Quiet at the End of the World, which is about two teenagers who are the last humans ever born, so they're growing up on a planet where everyone is going extinct, The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker, which is about a society of ghosts all living in an abandoned building, and most recently Green Rising, which came out in September and is a climate change thriller about teenagers who start growing plants from their hands and they use that to try and save the world. I also work as a screenwriter and editor. I run a charity called the Climate Fiction Writers League, which is a collective of authors working to do climate activism through their writing, and various other bits and bobs as well alongside that, but those are some of the main parts.
Well, I'd really be interested to know about this book in particular. Is this really reads as kind of like a love story to the planet, and I was kind of wondering if that was like your main intention when you wrote it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it was something that I've been thinking about for a while. I was really interested to write something about climate change, but I wanted to come about it in a really optimistic way, because I know there's like loads of dystopian post-apocalyptic books that talk about climate change, and I don't like reading them, so I wanted to try and write something that felt more uplifting. So it definitely started out as like, how can I write something that's going to be inspiring, but it's also going to make people feel good about nature and get them trying kind of looking at the world around them and seeing the positives rather than the negatives, and trying to keep hold of those and help preserve them. So fingers crossed I did a good job. I've had a few friends who say they read it and then immediately got really into gardening, because there's so many plants and flowers and like amazing bits where people grow wildernesses in their gardens, or in like urban areas that are a bit disused. So I've made a few people get into plants anyway.
No, definitely. That like I do not have green fingers. I shouldn't be allowed near plants. I'm one of them people that like I just can't seem to keep plants alive. Apart from sunflowers, I'm very good at growing sunflowers. But it does make me want to like start a garden and like fill it with just like wildflowers. And to be fair, that's probably the best ones to go for, because I don't feel like you need to do as much with kind of like wildflowers as you would do with kind of like very particular borders around the garden. So
Definitely. I think one of the biggest things that people can do that's so easy to stop climate change, well, not stop it, but help preserve what we've got, is just not mow their lawn and let the weeds grow in their lawn, which is really hard because like our brains see it as looking just messy. And when I first did it, I felt really ashamed that my neighbours were going to see my messy lawn. But like the amount of like insects and butterflies I get compared to my neighbours now, it's immediately within a year made a huge difference to like the nature that is found a place in my garden. So yeah, don't mow your lawn, let those flowers come through.
which is great because nobody enjoys mowing their lawn.
Yeah, exactly, it's less work.
Exactly, it's less work for you. So as you kind of mentioned, I feel like Green Rising could have very easily kind of become kind of your classic dystopian tale, but obviously instead is a lot more than that and is more of a positive outlook on what's kind of currently happening with climate and global warming. When I read it, I kind of viewed kind of like the teenagers and the characters within it as kind of like fuel for that kind of catalyst of change that needs to happen in order for us to kind of combat climate change. Was that always how you kind of had it planned out in your head, that the kind of characters within it were going to be kind of almost showing us the way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, a little bit. I was definitely inspired a lot by the teenagers who have been going on school strikes for climate activism, because it did get it in the news after like I would get really frustrated that climate change is such a big issue and it just wasn't being reported on. And then like maybe the news isn't reporting on these school strikers or protesters in a positive way, but it's at least getting climate change being mentioned, whereas it was very easy to just forget it was happening and we've only got 8 years or something left to deal with it. So I wanted to talk about those teenagers and like in an ideal world show how they could go from that to actually fixing the planet, which obviously isn't possible in the real world because there's so many like people who have vested interests in not doing that and keeping like all of this fossil fuel industry running. But in my book I can like give the teenage activists the power to actually make change with these plants that they can grow, and they can reforest the planet and pull all the plastic out the ocean and stuff. So that was really, really therapeutic to write because it's just kind of like the dream of what you want to happen, really. And I did a lot of research, and the more research I did, the more angry I would get at like politicians for not doing this, because so many of the solutions are so easy. Like, and also the solutions which are just going to make loads of jobs. Like, it's going to really boost the economy if we start putting climate solutions into action. So there's no reason not to do it, except that the oil companies don't want us to. So yeah, I really enjoyed getting to make the things I want to happen a reality. Sometimes I do forget that they didn't happen. Like, yeah, I was so absorbed in writing it, of being like, and then we're going to fix this and we're going to fix that, that I still sometimes think that actually happened.
we can hope. With, you mentioned research, I was really interested in like how much research you did for this book and how you managed like to communicate it so well, as in all the key elements of kind of climate change and what is happening to our planet are in this book, but they're in here in such like a easily digestible and understandable way. And I was wondering how you got from kind of like research, which can sometimes be a bit confusing. Obviously a lot of the times there's a lot of numbers involved and graphs and words that aren't used commonly by people that aren't scientists. And I wondered kind of like what your process was from get from A to this wonderful creation.
Yeah, so I have a science background. I studied chemistry and physics at uni, which definitely came in handy because, like you say, so many of the texts that are like up to date about climate change are really statistic heavy, or they have such like a scientific grounding. So that really came in useful. I didn't know a lot about climate change from my degree, but what I didn't know about so much was like the political and economic side of it. That was the bit I really had to research, whereas I knew like the scientific basis for what's happening to the ocean and stuff like that. So I ended up reading just as many non-fiction books about climate change as I could get. I think I read about 50. I was like a full-time job at one point, was just reading climate change fiction and non-fiction. And I was looking for books that were both like really recent, like that I got off NetGalley that hadn't come out yet, and like quite older books, because they obviously say different things, and they have that you can see like the progression of the climate conversation based on the year they were published, which was really useful because I wanted to have different characters of different generations have different views on climate change based on at what point in like that in history they had heard about it and learned about it and developed their stance. So what I was really looking for was like the things that people have opinions on that differ. So the stuff that is kind of not just pure fact, but is more subjective. And I wanted to like find all of the things that were good arguments either for or against climate change, because that's when you're going to get really good tension, when everyone is disagreeing and it's not really sure what the answer is to something. So yeah, lots of research, and then I kind of put as much of that as I could into the first draft. I then went through it and took out half of it because it got very science heavy, and then I sent it to my editor. She took out another half because it was too science heavy for her, which is great because that I have editors who aren't scientists, because they can like I try and like make sure that it's not too sciencey, because I know that most people don't get as excited by science as I do, and especially when I'm writing for young readers, I want to get to make sure that they like science rather than that it just drowns them in numbers. and so it's nice to like have someone else do that again for me. And we went through a few times and took out all of the bits that were just diversions or rants and weren't like absolutely necessary to know for the plot. I think that's the key thing as a reader. You can tell when you're being told some, like if you're reading a historical novel, you can tell when the person writing it just wanted to use all their research and they're just getting all of the facts they've learned about carriages in the 14th century on the page, and it's not actually necessary to the story. Whereas if it's like a key intrinsic thing that you need to understand from the plot, like, okay, so they have to get a wheel off a carriage, like as a reader I'm very happy to learn all about the mechanisms of wheels to get that scene plot happening. So I tried to make sure that every bit of information I included was like going to be useful in the plot, and I tried to make sure I covered as many areas as possible. Like I said, I wanted some sciencey areas, but also some about the politics and economics going on behind the scenes in the climate fight. So yeah, how did you find that as a reader? Did you find it was about the right amount of science?
Yeah, I found that it was a very good balance, as in overall, obviously there's a lot of kind of climate information, but it didn't at any point take away from the plot. It only ever added to it to kind of like bolster, like help my understanding of one, climate change in general, but like why certain characters were doing certain things and why A, B, and C was happening. So I think the balance was really, really like bang on. It was amazing. I like
because that was something I was really worried about.
I like science, but I do find that I like it in terms that are closer to kind of this. I think sometimes when I see statistics and numbers, my brain just goes, no, I can't deal with it. Whereas this like is like the perfect way to kind of introduce the ideas and kind of show the world what's kind of happening and give that information in a way that's interesting and entertaining, but is still based in kind of true facts. So I think you've done like really well with the balance of that. I was wondering, when you first kind of thought about writing Green Rising, was it always going to be written as kind of like a multi-perspective novel? Obviously we follow kind of like different characters throughout the plot and kind of their views on what's happening. And I also wanted to know, was it a conscious decision to have characters from kind of different backgrounds and social classes as the main kind of points of views? Because I think that works so well, as in like to help explain kind of like the global warming and kind of why it's happening and why certain people believe certain things. And I think that came across really well, and I don't know if it would have come across as well if it wasn't for those particular characters telling the story, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to know if it was like always the plan or it developed later on.
Yeah, definitely. Like one of the things that so I started out with writing romance novels. My first novel, The Next Together, is very solidly a romance novel. Since then I've got more sciencey, but at heart I still try and approach stories thinking about the romance first. And by that I mean that I think about who my characters are going to be and what their dynamic is going to be in terms of like what they bring to how they can be stronger together than apart. So what, when they work together, what each of their strengths are and weaknesses are and how they can fit together and provide different viewpoints. And in particular, like providing different viewpoints to each other was the key thing that I knew was going to be really important when it's a book about climate change. So I started out thinking like, okay, so if I want to tell a story about two different people who have conflicting views on climate change and they're very much enemies at the start, and then the romance brings them together, I need to see both their perspectives. So a dual narrative would work really well for that. And then I was thinking about like who would be the two extremes of the climate argument. If I wanted two characters who both believe that climate change is happening, but they're still coming at it from different points of view, because obviously it would make a lot of sense to have a climate denialist and someone who believes that climate change is happening. But I think at this point everyone is aware that climate change is happening, and in 10 or 15 years in the future, like, there's no way people are still going to be able to deny it unless they're very like determined to ignore the world around them. So I was kind of looking at it in terms of how can I create these two characters. So I ended up with Hester, who is the daughter of an oil baron, so she's going to inherit a fossil fuel company that's one of the biggest in the world, and she's being trained up for this position as CEO. And Theo, who is the son of a family of fishermen who are kind of losing their income because all of the fish have left the water near their family's home on the coast in England, because this oil company has put in a fossil fuel drilling platform near there. So immediately there's a lot of anger between them and vitriol, and who they are as people kind of grew from that. I really wanted to like have characters who would spark, and you could kind of see both their points of view and see how they were both wrong or both right. And yeah, I really hope that like having that dual narrative makes it feel like you're kind of getting a broader selection of the views people have on climate change, but also I think it adds a lot to the romance as well when you can see both their points of view. Like, so very very traditional romance novel formatting of having it flip between the boy and girl for each chapter. So that was a lot of fun because I'd never done that before either.
It came across so well, and I love both of them. They're just amazing characters, both of them. But I think it was just such an interesting way of kind of delivering the overall theme as well, with it being so kind of character focused. It kind of took you through the plot so well, and came across amazingly. So Gabrielle, I have questions. So a lot of what we hear about from her, without giving too much of the plot away, is kind of done through like news statement style pieces and kind of social media posts. And I was kind of hoping you could explain a little bit as to why you did that. I think I've got some personal ideas about it, but I'd like to know if they were the same as yours.
Yeah, so Gabrielle is the first character we meet in the prologue, and she's the first person to grow these plants with her magic, and so she becomes this like public figure known around the world as this famous girl with plant magic, and then it kind of spreads out and lots more teenagers get the power as well. But she uses that fame to like propel her into the news as a climate activist. So she's my kind of Greta Thunberg type figure. And I really was thinking for a while that I would have like her as a main point of view, where it would alternate between Hester, Theo and Gabrielle, between the three of them. But I tried writing that, and it was too much. I want like all of the things I wanted to say about climate activism were related to how they are spoken about in the news, and how they're seen as either good or bad, and how they use the internet as this kind of place to get their message across with social media influencers and stuff like that. And all of the stuff that comes along with being famous very young, and kind of the backlash you can get, or the gross comments and stuff like that. And a lot of readers have said, which surprised me, that they found her quite terrifying, like as a character, because I think you see her as this public figure, but you never really get to know her, and then she'll come into a scene and you'll see her from like Theo's point of view or whatever. And yeah, they found her quite scary because she's very self-confident. She's not afraid to break the law. She just does what she wants and believes in, and she has like these core values that she will not compromise on, and she won't let anyone stand in her way. And seeing that and like not knowing what she's thinking, I think is quite a scary thing. But yeah, I loved writing her. She was so much fun.
Yeah, she's definitely a very badass character, like knows what she wants, how she's going to do it and why, and it's just going to happen that way. And it's a very interesting kind of part of the novel. Obviously, I really enjoyed kind of the news statements and the social media kind of like style postings that kind of referred to her, because I think it mirrored a lot of what happens today with kind of like people who are viewed as famous. You only really get to see them from social media posts and news articles. And I think that then combined with seeing her from people that kind of know her or experienced her when she was kind of coming into other people's narratives to do certain things was really, really interesting to see the kind of parallels and differences between those two. But I can understand why people think she's quite a frightening character, because she's very, very kind of like driven. And yeah, she's great though. I loved reading kind of like the difference between something that's obviously news articles are quite like factual and, well, sometimes they're written in a certain kind of way, and I think then getting to see the same person written from someone's kind of viewpoint who is experiencing that person being in front of them doing things was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that kind of journey. But yeah,
I think it's something that our brains are really attuned to as well, is that we always are more interested in gossip than just science facts. So I could totally see, like, in 20 years or less, when the world is burning, like, we're still just going to be discussing what some celebrity's doing and ignoring the news, skimming past the news articles about the national disasters, because that's what we like reading about. And I know, like, during COVID, like, I wasn't interested in reading about the pandemic, but I was very interested in looking at who on my Instagram timeline was like not following lockdown guidelines and living their life, like, because the gossip part of your brain finds that more interesting. So yeah, I had a great time, like, thinking about that. And in general, I just like talking about internet things and writing things that comment on the internet, because I think it's such an underexplored part of fiction when it's such a big part of our lives, like how we live online.
yeah, I think because you can't, in today's world, you can't get away from living online at least part of the time. I mean, I don't think anyone can honestly say that every single day they're not viewing, seeing something in an online format. And I think
Yeah.
that was really interesting, especially with kind of the more social media posts and the news articles, and then the comments underneath, I felt were a very interesting, um it hits different, because obviously we all go online and see people being trolled on their social medias, especially if they're celebrities, or news articles that have got comments underneath that can be mean and horrible about the people that are being spoken about in the news article. But I think it hits different slightly seeing it on a written page in a book. I think it highlights how that's not, it stands out as more not okay seeing it on a printed page, because I think with everybody living online so much, people have it's almost like climate change, people know it happens, but they kind of just like breeze past it without taking a second to be like, that's not really okay.
Yeah, there's a quote that I thought about a lot when I was writing, which is like, we're all going to see the climate crisis happen through phone videos on our timeline until one day we're the one holding the phone and taking the video, which was something I really wanted to like show in the book, was like how much this, like, a casual comment will either be something really cruel and vindictive about a teenage girl, or it will be a devastating loss of an entire family to some natural disaster, because that's already, I feel like, what the internet is like. For me, when I go on Twitter, it's like someone's died, someone's being harassed, like that's it, that's what life is like now online.
Yeah, and I think that captured it really well. I really enjoyed the format. It was very good. So a big part of kind of the book focuses on kind of industries, and obviously in particular the oil industry, and how it's almost them that we have to change most. They're the people that kind of need to make the most changes, which is kind of a really refreshing look at climate change, because I think a lot of the time when it's covered, it's you should change your light bulbs or buy a reusable bag, which helps. It definitely helps, but I think until the larger effects are kind of combated, that's not going to make as much as noticeable of a difference. How do you think we are going to be able to kind of create that change, or are we? Hopefully we are.
Yeah, it's really scary. And like you say, so much of the conversation, which is carefully manipulated by oil companies, is about putting the blame on individuals. Like, are you using plastic straws? You shouldn't be. Like, make sure you recycle. When you never hear about the fact that the US military is the biggest polluter and emitter of carbon dioxide in history. Like, its output each year is bigger than several European countries. Like, and you never hear that. And so they're the ones that need to change. Like, if we're, as individuals, we're doing like 1% of the damage, and yet we're expected to solve it ourselves. So once you realize that, it's really frustrating to see those conversations online going in completely the wrong direction. So the big thing that can actually make a difference is money. So we're basically, every bank or pension scheme or saving scheme or company that has money that they're investing in other companies, all of that is funding the fossil fuel industry. So the best things you can do are make sure that you are not using a bank that puts your money straight into an oil company. Make sure that your company or your employer or your university, they're not putting your pension into fossil fuel investments. Like, everything you use is going to go back to fossil fuels at some point, and it's impossible to stop that for everything, but as long as you can make sure the big chunks of your money are not invested in fossil fuels, you're sending out a message with the only power you have. Another big thing is sign up for any newsletters from climate change charities, and make sure that when they are putting out a call for you to put your name on a petition, that you do it, because that's the only power they have, is our collective voice. And especially in the UK, we have a great system where if a petition gets a certain number of signatures, it has to get discussed in Parliament. So anytime there is a request for something like that, you need to get your signature on there. So the climate Twitter or whatever that you follow will be asking for that, and like follow through and do it, which only takes a few minutes. Vote in your elections and make sure your MPs know about your beliefs in climate action. The big thing that for me, when I found out this was like a big point of hope for me that we are going to fix things, is that renewable energy, so wind and solar energy, is currently a lot cheaper than oil or petrol. And the only reason we're not just switching to renewable energy because it's cheaper is because governments give the fossil fuel industry a lot of subsidies so they can charge less for oil. And if we can petition the government or vote for the right people to stop giving those subsidies, it's going to be like half the price for electricity in your house, because renewables are so cheap now. They've got the technology, they just need the big companies that supply utilities to switch over to them in factories or whatever. So those are the big things that are, for me, like, that's going to be the tipping point within the next 5 years. Just by economics, we're going to be switching to renewable energy, and after that it's just a matter of transitioning all the cars on the road and the lorries over to electric as well, because they will, when it's cheaper for the consumer, they will obviously switch over. So it's all a matter of time, and it's whether we can do it in time to save things. Obviously there's no point where we're going to ruin the planet if we don't do it by a certain date, because however long it takes, we need to do it. But yeah, I personally, the more research I did, the more hope I had that things were going in the right direction, because the economics say that like money always wins out, and it is cheaper to solve climate change for most people. Like there's some billionaires who are going to make a lot of money off climate change, but for the rest of us, it's cheaper to fix it.
They already have their money. They don't need any more. Which is
yeah, if only that argument worked for them.
It's always that thing where obviously the argument's often used that oil produces a lot of jobs, but if something comes up to replace oil, the jobs move. It's you know what I mean. It just can,
yeah.
There's always workarounds for those kind of things. It's not completely impossible to change things like that. Just because something is already set up and running doesn't mean you have to stay with that one thing. So
every time the government does like grants to support people making their homes more eco-friendly or putting in green insulation or whatever, like every small business is overpowered by orders. They're still working through the backlog from the last grant, so like the business is there, they just need to make sure that it's being funneled to the right people, and yeah, then the small businesses will do the rest, which is what we want to happen, obviously.
Definitely. So with all that in mind, was that why I found it really refreshing that the book kind of focused a lot on that? So was it a conscious decision to always kind of make sure that it was kind of told through as like, yes, you have some things to do as an individual, but also we need to kind of challenge this? And was it always a conscious decision to kind of refer back to how long the conversation's been kind of going on? Because obviously it's something I learned about in school, and hasn't really moved along in terms of kind of like action about it. We learned about it and the effects of it and kind of what was going to happen in the grand scheme of things if we didn't do anything. And then I feel like you could probably give the same lesson word for word that was taught to me then now, obviously with some kind of more developed statistics on how far it's kind of developed since then. So was it kind of always really important to add that to the narrative, that it has kind of been going on so long?
Yeah, all of the stuff you've just said is stuff that makes me personally so angry. Like I remember in primary school like 15 years ago being like, oh, so there's a problem but the adults are fixing it, right? And then like 15 years later the same problem and the same solutions exist and they're not being done. And it's so frustrating, and that's, I feel, where most teenagers today are at. Like the message they're being given is, oh, I can't wait for you to grow up and save the world. And it shouldn't be their responsibility. It should have happened in the 1980s or in the 50s, or like we've known about climate change for over 100 years. There's no reason we should be expecting the next generation who are currently 10 to fix it. So I really wanted to move the conversation towards that kind of anger and frustration, and give something therapeutic for all the young readers, because I do have readers as young as 12, because I felt like that viewpoint hadn't been represented as much. And I think it's really hard to like find the balance between saying like, as an individual there's nothing you can do, give up hope and just make as much pollution as you want and throw litter on the ground because it won't make a difference, but also being like, you can like do something to help, but it's not your responsibility. Don't feel guilty every time you buy something and it's wrapped in unrecyclable plastic, because that's the responsibility of the person who sold it to you. Coca-Cola should have by far got the resources to use compostable plastic at this point. Like, you don't have to worry about that, you're a 9-year-old. Like, that kind of message for me was really important. And yeah, it's frustrating that we're still not seeing a shift to that in media. There's still so much of a focus on the individual, but I'm hopeful. Even since I started researching the book, there's been so many other books coming out about climate change. Like, I remember trying to look for them and there just being none being published, and then this year there's been a lot. So yeah, fingers crossed over the next few years we'll be going in the right direction.
Yeah, hope for everything fast. So before we go, I have a couple of book club questions from the girls in the book club at the shop. My brain just died a little bit then. I couldn't. I managed. So the main question that they were really kind of interested in asking people was, have you always wanted to be an author, or has it been something that kind of developed later in life? We've got some people that are really interested in writing, so I think they like to know kind of the ins and outs of how people have got to the point where they've become an author.
Yeah, so I definitely am a reader first. I used to go to my local library as a kid and get as many books out as I could on my library card, my mum's and my dad's and my brother's, and I'd read them all and take them back. So when I started writing, it wasn't really like with the intention of getting published. It was just because I liked reading and I wanted to read books that didn't exist. I used to get like a craving, like I need to read this kind of book. And what's brilliant is now if that happens, I just write it down and make it happen. So I started out writing for me, and also because it was like a social thing, because my friends were doing NaNoWriMo, which is obviously a writing scheme that happens in November where you try and write a 50,000 word book in 1 month. And from there, like I think it really helped as well that I was studying something that was so different from writing. So I studied chemistry and physics, and there's no essay portion of either of those topics at university. So the whole time I was at university, I did not ever write an essay or have to read a book. It was all calculations and labs and stuff. So going into a Word document and writing was genuinely fun. It was a joy. It was completely different from what I was doing in my work life. So I managed to finish a first draft of my novel. I started when I was 16 and I finished it when I was 20. And then I got a book deal a few, like 6 months before I graduated. So I went into graduation like planning to take a gap year and try and be a writer for a year and then go and get a real job after that. And I was very lucky in that I was submitting to publishers during the YA boom. So it was the time when Rainbow Rowell and John Green were really popular, but people weren't necessarily writing as much YA as they are now. So publishers were very keen to buy as much as they could get. And so my agent was actively looking for lots of YA books, and publishers were buying as much as they could, which meant that they were willing to take on my book, which hadn't been edited, and kind of train me on the job. And I really spent a long time basically learning how to edit with my amazing editor at Walker Books. And like, I definitely don't think if I'd have submitted my first book now, when the YA genre is so big and there is such a demand for these, like everyone is competing for the few publishing contracts there are, I wouldn't have had as much luck, because my first draft really wasn't good. I know every debut author says that, but I had not done anything like a mentoring course with Write Mentor, or I'd never like done a round of structural edits. I'd never really read a book on how to write a novel. I just read a lot myself, so I did like had some basis from what I was thinking about books I was reading, but apart from that I wasn't doing anything. And so many of the authors that I work with as an editor and see get published are putting in the work before they submit to an agent, and that's why they're getting book deals, and I hadn't done any of that. So I got really lucky, and I think so much of getting published is just luck. Like, who could say who would ever be published otherwise? But yeah, I'm very happy to be in the position I'm in.
A question that everyone really wanted to know were, what's your favorite thing about writing?
Definitely just being able to, like, so whenever I watch TV or read a book and get really obsessed with the characters or the romance or whatever, and I want to talk about it all the time, I just turn that into a story. So not that I write fan fiction, but I like look at what I am interested in and what part of the dynamic or whatever really captures my attention, and I write a list of those things and then I put them in my next project. So I'm like turn my obsessions into something useful, which is so nice and exciting. So like I really like What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show, and the character Guillermo in that. So I was making notes on like what kind of character he was the other day, and like how I can write a character like that in a book. And it was just like pure joy. I would have been doing this even if I wasn't getting paid for it, but the fact that it's my real job is a massive bonus.
And I think the passion that you have for that kind of process and kind of looking into the world around you and getting inspiration, it comes through into your book so well, in that it's so grounded in reality, and kind of it's got a very it's very good at kind of, it's like you're following someone's passion through the book. It's really like engaging to read with. It's something that's obviously been written with a lot of kind of like interest on climate change, but the characters themselves and how people would react in that, so it kind of totally makes sense that it's elements that you kind of see and pull together out of passion and an obsession with things like that. So that totally makes sense.
A review I read once said that reading a Lauren James book is like watching an old episode of Star Trek. It's a bit cheesy, but you'll have a lot of fun. And I always keep that in mind, because that's exactly what it's like to write them as well. I'm always like looking for the ways I can embarrass my characters the most, or the funniest, weirdest jokes I can get in, because I want to write something unique. I hate when you pick up a book that's really hyped and then you read it and it's just, there's no character voice, or it feels like the same book you've read before. I want to create something that nobody else but me could have written, because why else am I doing this if I don't put as much of myself into it as possible? So I'm really glad that comes across, how much fun I'm having with it, because I definitely am.
It definitely does. And the jokes in this had me chuckling, even though obviously I don't want to give away what the jokes are. But I adored them. I was chuckling to myself, which is always a strange look when you're reading and you're just kind of like having a little chuckle. When the front cover says "in a climate catastrophe" and you're just sat there like,
yeah. Excellent. That's the best thing. I think the very first thing my agent said to me in the first email she sent me after I submitted my query letter was, "This is an often funny novel." And I was like, ah. For months after that I would be like, "An agent says I'm often funny." So it's a big compliment.
Definitely. Yeah, I loved it. It made it so much more kind of relatable and engaging as well, that there were the elements in there that were just humor and fun, because the real world isn't, even though we've got this kind of big gloom above us that kind of needs to be tackled, the world isn't all dark, and there's still moments of kind of like humor in individual people's lives, even if they are kind of, as they are in this book, keys to kind of like the solution. So it worked really well. They also wanted to know who's your favorite author, or if you have a book recommendation, which I know is the trickiest question they could possibly ask, because I hate it when people ask me this question.
I'm going to give two, one really recent and one really old school. So I love female science fiction writers and fantasy writers. That's like the main thing I'm reading at the minute. And I'm a really big fan of Naomi Novik's work. Her fantasy books are so good, and she clearly reads everything, because you can see her influences and her commentary on them. So her latest series, The Last Graduate, is this amazing like take on what a real school with magic users would be like, and how awful it would be to have magic.
So good.
And So good. Like, I think I've read both books in the series so far in one sitting without looking down. Like, it was brilliant, and I think just like, she is my god. I met her once and it was like proper like role model shaky knees fangirling. I nearly
I just
curtsied to
started
her.
crying. I might have fainted.
So she's amazing, and also she set up Archive of Our Own, so she is just a queen in so many different ways. And then my old school recommendation is Lois McMaster Bujold. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she is a sci-fi writer who's been writing since, I think, the 80s or the 70s, and she's always been very diverse, very feminist, very good at writing female focused takes on what the far future might be like. So she writes these this like series, I think there's about 25 books now, all set in the same world, called the Vorkosigan saga, about this very precocious genius who goes off and like does heists and becomes a political strategist and a general, and he like takes over the world, and he's like this impish figure called Miles Vorkosigan, and each book is in a different genre, so they're all set in the same world, but one book, like I said, it will be like a bank heist on a planet. Another will be like a Regency romance set on a planet that's kind of very traditional and about courting and romance. And then another will be like a political, like House of Cards style debate series. And they're all just brilliant. Like, if you really like taking familiar tropes and seeing them done by someone who's very savvy to like tropes and genre fiction and just done really well, but also with a focus on like making sure that in the future, obviously women aren't going to want to be pregnant anymore. Everyone is going to be reproducing in like artificial wombs. Like, that would be the first thing we would do. Like, that kind of focus on something that makes sense from a female perspective, which you don't see very often in old school sci-fi. Like, read some bad stuff, so I really recommend her stuff.
Definitely. I think I will have to look her up because they sound incredible. I think sci-fi and fantasy, especially the past kind of like few years in particular, like having different voices and showing and kind of exploring feminism and diversity has just kind of become so much easier to find in those kind of books. I adore them. They're kind of, fantasy has always been my like main genre that I kind of read from, and sci-fi is becoming something that like I really enjoy. A few, probably when I was younger, I think I got put off a little bit because I didn't always find it connected with me.
Yeah,
there wasn't always the characters I wanted to read about, or it seemed so kind of like far-fetched because it wasn't written from kind of like a viewpoint I understood. But I think nowadays there's some amazing sci-fi out that's just so good. And like,
I don't know about you, but during the pandemic I found it really hard to read books that I didn't already know the characters of the world. Like, I just wanted to read about characters I already knew, but like I had enough stuff going on in my brain. So being out discovering an author where you can get to know the characters and then you can just stay with them for 30 books, like, that is always my dream. I want characters and writing I love that I can come back to, and it's always going to work for me. And yeah, Lois McMaster Bujold especially is a prime example of that.
There's something I think especially with people that like fantasy and sci-fi, there's something so special about series and revisiting characters, because I think it is like a comfort. I suppose it's like rewatching TV series that you used to watch. It's that comfort of going back and revisiting those characters and the world that they're in. That's just amazing. So one last question, and it is a tricky one. If you had to bring one person to life from Green Rising, who would it be and why?
Oh my god, that's such a hard one, because that's like asking me to choose my favorite child.
Yeah.
um Probably Hester, because I would love to think that someone like her is gonna help run the world one day. She's not as scary as Gabrielle, but she's very organized. She's independent. She can go out and take control of a whole team and run a project on her own. And she's very cool. Like, I wish I was more like her. So yeah, I think I would go for Hester. But mainly, I think the thing I'd want from the book is just to have the plant magic myself. I would love to be able to go and fill my garden with flowers whenever I wanted to.
I wouldn't be known as the person that kills plants if I could grow them. Like, that would be like something that when I read, I was like, that is a very cool power. It's just one of those powers that you read about and you're like, actually, that would be really cool. I've never thought about having that as a power before, but it would be like fascinating. But yeah, Hester would definitely be an amazing character to just see in the real world, because I think they would get stuff done.
Yeah,
but in a less way than maybe Gabrielle.
Gabrielle, I don't quite trust. I think even when she's solved climate change, she's still going to continue to be a bit of a rebel.
Yeah, definitely. I think there would be like it would be really interesting actually to kind of think about what she would do after climate change was kind of like solved. Like, what would be the next thing for her to kind of like, I don't want to say sink her claws into or teeth into, that just makes it sound more scary. But yeah, it would be interesting to see, like, because that doesn't often happen, I think, in the real world, where you kind of you work so hard to kind of solve something and then actually see it solved. Because I think a lot of things that people kind of work towards are things that we constantly have to, there's kind of no end date. If it's racism or diversity, anything like that, there's always something else. So I think it would be,
like, there's only a few examples in history where we've like successfully solved a problem, like with the ozone layer. Like, we saw a problem and we fixed it, and the people involved got to be really satisfied that they had stopped that happening. And that's so rare with other things that must be amazing feeling to be involved in something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, it's gonna be in my head all day now. Like, what would she do? You're gonna have to write like a little, even if it's just a chapter of what next.
Yeah, I definitely have in mind like what I know Hester's going to do next. Without many spoilers, she's definitely going to go outside of Earth. But I haven't really thought about Gabrielle, so I'll have to do some thinking on that as well. Maybe she takes on the tech industry and fixes the internet.
Now, for my next move, I will solve the internet and all the horrible trolling that goes on. I think that would be something that she'd definitely want to kind of like sort out as well. All right then.
Oh, maybe she'd hack into all the student loan companies' systems and wipe off everyone's debt. I could see her doing that. We know she can like rappel into buildings and get into hard drives and servers. So yeah, that would be her thing probably.
So maybe I bring Gabrielle to life so she can do that for me.
Yeah.
I would like somebody to do that for me.
And she would love another chance to break the law, so it would work for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's all the questions for today. So if you wanted to kind of let people know where they can find you, I will link all your kind of social media in the description box as well. And then I will let you get off to enjoy the rest of your day and think about what Gabrielle's going to do next, because I will be doing that.
So I'm on Twitter as Lauren_E_James. I'm on Instagram as Lauren Eliz James, Eliz for Elizabeth. And if you're interested in more about climate fiction and activism through fiction, I run a newsletter through the Climate Fiction Writers League. So the website for that is climate-fiction.org, and you can sign up for the newsletter I run on there, which is full of amazing essays. It's one of the best things I do, is getting to read all these essays written by the authors that I love so much. So I highly recommend checking them out. And yeah, I have like all the usual stuff, like a website with a blog and a Tumblr and a YouTube. Like wherever you want to find me, I'm probably there. Except TikTok. I refuse to go near TikTok, even though I probably should.
I see. I'm really bad with TikTok, so I've started one under the Charley at the Rabbit Hole kind of theme I have going on, and I get distracted scrolling through and never actually post things. So usually you'll find like I've posted a reel which really should be on TikTok as well, and I just forget because I get distracted by like, people dancing, and you know, I've got hooked into those the new kind of book Instagram book talk videos they do, where they kind of show you a book and then they put loads of photos of like the aesthetic of the book, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
I get really obsessed just flicking through those, especially if it's a book I've read, like seeing if I agree with it.
Yeah, they used to do those on Tumblr as like GIF sets of like the mood board, didn't they? I think I prefer that. Whenever it's a video, I'm always like, but I want to pause and look at the oh, and it's got like I'm too frustrated at how quick it is, which I guess is the point.
Yeah, I think I tried to do one the other day that was like, I think it was like this is my favorite book thing, and obviously the voice was saying this is my favorite book and this one, and I was like, I can't physically pick the books up and show them that quickly. Like I was books, I was like, there must be like 15 videos of me just looking really confused and like frustrated at these books just going everywhere. And then when I finally did it, I realized because I'd done it in the app and not on my phone, all the book covers were back to front.
Oh no.
I was just like,
this is why I'm not going near TikTok. It's too frustrating for me. I'm too old now. I'm 29. I can't be doing with this modern technology.
Could delete it and redo it, but I'm just going to leave it up. So if you want to chuckle at some video, some of my favourite books, but backwards, it's still on Instagram for your viewing pleasure. Because I was like, there's no way I can film that again. So I'm just going to have to film it. But yeah, thank you so much for today.
Thank you for the amazing questions, Charley. This has been a joy.